This is the Farm Voices podcast, sharing information about regenerative agriculture. I'm speaking with Deborah Davis of DWD Longhorns in Texas. Good morning. Thank you for sharing your time with us.
Good morning.
Can you share a bit of the story of the name of your ranch?
Well, DWD, my husband's name is Don, and my name is Deborah. So Davis, DWD. We played with middle names, and we landed on my husband's middle name, William, because you can turn it into horns with the brand, and our logo has the DWD in it. So that's where that came from.
And what type of animals do you raise? Although it's already in your name.
We raise Heritage Texas Longhorns.
Were you always intending to work with a conservation breed? Or if not, how did you come to specialize in Texas Longhorn cattle?
That was not my original intention. Don and I both are graduates of the University of Texas, and their mascot is the Texas Longhorn. When we were young, Don's father had a piece of property that had been in the family for a number of years, and we decided we wanted to get a couple of Longhorns just for fun. So we got some Longhorns because we had that connection, not only with the university, but just the whole Texas history connection. Our families being from this area, we just somehow felt a connection with the Texas Longhorns, and we stumbled into the business. We never really intended to become livestock breeders.
And what are some of the special characteristics of Texas Longhorn cattle?
Well, what makes them really valuable agriculturally is not their horns. They're pretty, but these animals evolved here over 400 years by natural selection. They were brought here by the Spaniards, and they ran feral, and they adapted to this environment. So unlike so many other breeds that have been selected by man for many hundreds of years, these cattle adapted to this very arid, rugged area, and they survive here and breed and raise calves with very little input from me.
Thank you. And why use a conservation breed? Are there additional reasons?
Well, yes. The idea of blending all genetics from all over the world into one breed, that is detrimental because each diverse group has different valuable characteristics. One may have immunity to a disease that another does not. One may be more adapted to a desert climate, where another may be more adapted to a tropical environment. So it's really important to maintain diversity and have as many separate, pure breeds as you can. When you cross those, you get hybrid vigor, a hardier animal. So in my instance with a beef animal, in the beef industry, that's desirable to raise healthy meat for the food system.
So you're really keeping track of the history of the cows that you have, and that's an important part of your work.
Yes, very much so.
Those family lineages.
Yeah. The cattle registry that I'm involved with, we do DNA testing. We've worked with geneticists, not only in this country, but other countries and in South America and in Europe, because there's other people that understand the value of this diversity.
And you mentioned something about that ending up in a healthier meat product.
Yes. Yeah. The Texas Longhorn, we've done some carcass test on them. Their beef is higher in protein than a lot of the other breeds. It's lower in saturated fat. It has a flavor that is really robust. I'm not saying gamey, I'm saying intense beef flavor. If you compare Longhorn beef, particularly grass-fed Longhorn beef, with just your generic commercial breed that comes out of a feedlot, the feedlot meat is going to taste watered down, whereas the Longhorn beef is going to have a real intense beef flavor that a lot of people really like.
And it's amazing how much that impacts the nutrition of the food and the health impacts of eating that food.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Where in Texas is your ranch located?
We are in South Central Texas, in the Hill Country, about 75 miles northwest of San Antonio.
Mm-hmm. And how long have you been ranching there?
About 25 years.
Right. Can you give us an idea of the feel of your ranch and what you love about the location?
Well, we're very secluded. We're in a valley surrounded by hills. This time of year, it's green and lush and beautiful. We have real diverse wildlife and particularly birds. We've counted over 50. Actually, it was over 70 breeding species of birds last year when we did a bird count. So it's just a really unique area in Texas because of the hills. It's just sort of a different feel.
And you mentioned the birds. I noticed on your website that you are an Audubon certified bird-friendly land. What does that mean?
Well, it's an audit process similar to organic certification or animal welfare certification. It's kind of a stringent audit where the Audubon people, they want to make sure that our beef production practices are friendly for the environment and encourage birds. That's Audubon's big focus, is birds. So a lot of the practices that we do, we make sure that we're not negatively impacting any kind of bird life, be it nesting habitat or just a place for them to live even in the wintertime. So that's real important to me, is all the other stuff out here besides myself and the cattle.
Mm-hmm. And the birds seem like they would be a good ecological indicator of the health of the land.
Absolutely. The birds, the bees, the butterflies, all of those tell you a lot.
And how does that diversity of wildlife that's present on the land, what does that tell you about the health of the land for the cows and for their life cycle and their young?
Yeah. Well, when there is food for other species, then the whole environment is working properly. The nutrient system is cycling properly. We've joked in the past about some farmers that will go out and kill all the jackrabbits because they were eating their crops. And then the coyotes start preying on their calves. So then they have to go kill all the coyotes. It's like, well, you just took away their natural food source. So we feel like there's a place for everything. We don't try and select one for the other.
That's great. What are some of the challenges of your location?
Well, over the last 10 years, we have seen drastic change in our climate. If anybody is a climate change skeptic, they need to talk to me. It is not uncommon now to have 45 or more days of triple-digit temperatures in a row.
Wow.
And when we moved here 25 years ago, it was part of the conversation. It's like, wow, it was 101 today. And that was unusual. You might have that in July and August a few days, but now it's the norm or even higher. And on top of that, we get on average about 10 inches less rainfall than we did 25 years ago. So times are hard.
Wow.
We have to keep our stock rate low, and we have to implement a lot of conservation management practices to preserve the soil and make sure we have enough forage cover to hold moisture in the soil, or it'll all blow away.
And could you share what do you mean by keeping the stock rate low?
I run or try and keep 40 mama cows. I mean, it may vary by 5 either way, but 25 years ago, we could run 80 without any negative impact, but we've had to reduce because I want to make sure I don't have to supplemental feed. I mean, we'll put out hay when it's below freezing just to help them stay warm. But I don't ever want to be in a situation to where my ranch cannot grow enough feed to feed my herd. If that happens, I'm overstocked and it's going to damage the soil. So we keep the numbers low.
And when you say when you're talking about the feed that you're growing, how are you feeding your animals?
I don't grow any crops. We just graze the native ranch land. So we use a planned grazing system, a kind of a savory planned grazing system. And in the spring, when the grass is growing fast, there's ample moisture, we will move through our pastures more quickly. And that way the cattle are just taking the top part of the forage off and move them real fast because it's going to grow back real fast. As soon as the real summer hits, which is going to come in the next couple of weeks, it's going to start getting hot and dry. We have to slow down our rotation so that we have more recovery time per pasture. So the more separate paddocks you have, the better you can manage the land that you have.
Thank you. And are there any other benefits or pressures associated with your location?
We are starting to see urban development encroaching out here. And I never thought I would see that as far as we are from the cities. But there have been some ranches that are within 10 miles of here that have been bought up by developers and cut into, they started out with 5-acre tracts. That sounds like a nice piece of property to put a house on, but each of those is going to have to sink a well, and groundwater has become very precious here. We went to battle with a kind of a neighborhood group, got in touch with the TCEQ, and got them to change the rules to where now, in order to drill a well, you have to have a minimum of 10 acres. It's still a whole lot of wells that are going to be put in the ground. And a lot of people that move here from the city, they don't understand the importance of the biodiversity and leaving things as they are. They may come in and plant grass species that are not native. Then they have to irrigate, then they have to put out pesticides and fertilizer, and that ends up in the creek. It's all the same problems that you see in the city. But when it comes out here in rural areas, it is going to negatively impact the water table, which ultimately is the water supply for the people in the urban areas.
Are there any resolutions or other measures that you would like to see put in place to help protect the water sources and
from a policy making standpoint, there are businesses and also individuals that want to come in and drill really deep wells, like down into the Trinity Aquifer, and pump thousands of gallons of water, some of them just simply to fill vanity ponds. Others to, like it's been many moons ago, but there was a catfish farm that was pumping so much fresh water out of the aquifer and then just pouring it out on the ground once they were through with it. There needs to be restrictions on use. We all need enough for us to drink and to run our households, maybe water our lawn, but not just flagrant misuse of a resource that's really valuable. And this area where I live, it is the recharge zone for the Edwards Aquifer, which is the water supply for San Antonio. So we're really focused on holding the water, capturing it, not letting it run off down the creeks. We want to absorb it into the ground where it does get back into the aquifer. And in coming years, with more and more people moving here, they're going to need even more than is available.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Could you explain a bit about how you use regenerative agriculture or conservation practices on your ranch?
Yeah. Some of the things that we will do, I already talked about rotating the animals through different pastures, and monitoring that forage height and the amount of time that it needs to recover. In addition to that, there's some simple things you can do. Moving, like if I'm going to put out a supplement, my cattle need salt, my cattle need mineral, and I use call up cubes if I need to gather them, like gather the calves or something. To move all of those to different locations, it sounds like a really simple thing, but it makes a huge difference. There are some farmers that just have a permanent location where they keep their mineral, and the cattle walk to that day after day, and that whole area becomes like a desert. There's no forage, the land is impacted, it's not going to absorb any water. Simply moving that mineral every couple of weeks prevents that from ever happening. So I'm trying to think what else we can do. We collect rainwater, and put not huge amounts, but we'll have a storage that we can use to put water out for wildlife. So we'll have little troughs or little pilas for quail and turkey and stuff like that we have collected from rainwater that we store in a trough that's covered so it doesn't evaporate. Simple little things that you can do that are going to benefit the environment.
Mm-hmm. And how long have you been using regenerative agriculture or conservation practices?
About 23 years, I would say.
So right from the beginning, really.
Pretty close, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Can you share a success story or an obstacle that you faced using regenerative ranching practices?
Well, we have seen an increase in our soil organic matter. When I first tested it in 2003 in our most intensively used pasture, which I say intensive because we graze it for our grass finished beef. It has the best forage and the best soil. We tested that in 2003, and the organic matter was 2.55. And then I tested it maybe every 5 years after that. And the last test I ran, I wrote that down somewhere, I think it was 2012. It was up to 4.6.
Wow.
So we've doubled the amount of organic matter in the soil. And what that means is that helps the tilth, the ability for the water to channel down through the roots of plants into the soil and stay there. And also now the new thing is carbon capture. Well, we tested the carbon, and depending on the pasture and the places we tested, it was anywhere from 2.5 to over 10. So, and 10 was in some really crazy places where I wouldn't think it would be. But that is just how much carbon are we pulling out of the atmosphere and putting back down in the soil where it suddenly becomes a nutrient for the plants. That's where it belongs.
And supporting that healthy ecosystem that you described
Yes.
earlier, which is amazing. Yes. Right. Have you used any of the USDA federal or state programs to support or augment your regenerative or conservation agriculture practices?
We have. We started back in, I believe it was 2000 or 2001. We worked with EQIP to help us build interior fences so that we could divide this ranch only had 2 pastures at the time. We divided it, so now we have 8 pastures. Ideally 16 is where I'd like to get. But in doing so, we not only built fencing, but we also added some water. So each pasture has 2 sources of water. And we joined with the CSP program in 2004 and continue with that program. What that does is it rewards good behavior. I was talking about moving the mineral and moving the herd around so you're not in the same place at the same time of year every year. And just keeping those records. CSP will pay on an acre basis for you to implement those kind of practices, and doing monitoring. We'll go out, and I've got some exclosures that the cattle cannot graze inside, and I can measure the forage inside versus the forage outside that they have grazed, and know in advance when it's time to move. So it's not damage done to the pastures. And I keep all those records and report every year to the Natural Resource Conservation Service. And it's just a really good working relationship with them. We also used an EQIP back several years ago to put in a solar well. We had an existing well, but it would be really, really expensive to get electricity to it because it was so far off the grid. And we were having to use an electric generator to run it. So they came in and put in a solar well that's just a lot more reliable. And we cost shared with that. So there's some really good programs that help us do conservation practices.
So it sounds like that helped you in terms of your operations and profitability and, the way that your ranch is functioning, but also you're contributing to the community in the region by improving your pasture rotation and water use and so forth.
Correct. Yeah, water is the big thing here. It's becoming more valuable than oil.
Is there anything else you'd like to share about how those programs helped your ranch?
Off the top of my head, I can't think of anything.
That's quite a lot. I'm thinking about the 2024 Farm Bill and the Inflation Reduction Act. Do you have any suggestions on how the new Farm Bill could work better for you and other ranchers?
Well, I feel like there are a lot of programs that will benefit export. And I realize that's good for our country's economy. But being a domestic producer of locally marketed product, it doesn't benefit me. There's a lot of hunger in this country that we're still not addressing. And I would like to see freedoms that we've always had as agricultural producers in how we keep our records, how we track our animals, what is coming down the pipe is animal ID that will benefit the export market. But who has to pay for it? Me. I don't export. But the farmers that take their stock to the sale barn and they're bought up, sent to feed yards, and that beef is exported, those the people that are doing the export are the ones that need to fund that animal ID for their benefit. So it should be left up to the producer how they want to do that. It should not be mandated on anyone, because it's the small farmer that's going to be hit with the bill for no benefit. So that's a real big one to me, is to maintain the freedoms of our own choice.
Some legislators wish to take the $20 billion in conservation agriculture funding in the IRA and use it for other farm bill purposes. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about potential impacts of repurposing that funding.
Well, seeing the impact that this ranch makes for water that supplies San Antonio, and that's just my one little spot on the planet. I think a lot of the dollars need to stay where they are in conservation practices because of the impact on water. You know, giving it to the big ag guys so they can produce more for export while we're having problems trying to fill the water needs for the urban areas here, that's a mistake.
And what specific programs or funding would be helpful to your ranching operations? In addition to the ones that you've already covered.
Well, yeah, the CSP is the big one, and EQIP. To me, those are the two most important programs for small producers.
Great. What would you like to see your member of Congress do to improve your ranching operations and profitability?
Some of the things we've already discussed, like limiting blatant misuse of groundwater, not imposing animal ID or other restrictive, burdensome practices that are really designed to benefit the export market. I am not a farmers market person, but there are a lot of people that produce for farmers market sales, meat and vegetables. And I think programs that benefit the cottage food industry are always beneficial for every community.
Is there anything else that you would like to tell us about your ranch practices, or other topics and concerns related to regenerative agriculture?
Well, I have to boast about my cattle.
Yes, please.
The breeds, the breed of cattle that we raise here are endangered. There are multiple animals out there with horns that people call longhorns, but the DNA testing that we do is to conserve the conservation, the heritage breed that is not integrated with African and English cattle. There's tens of thousands of horned animals out there that are influenced by other breeds, and that is becoming that composite animal that is not good for biodiversity. So I have to brag that my cattle are the old time cattle, and they just do beautifully in this environment.
Mm-hmm. And they have some special physical characteristics that help them thrive where you are.
Well, they Longhorns do not have a lot of pendulous skin that hangs down because there's a lot of thorns. It's a thorny brush here, so they don't get cut up with that. Their horns are designed to defend themselves from predators. We as man select for pretty horns, bigger horns, just as a novelty, but they do serve a purpose. And single trait selection is very detrimental to any breed. So when I select an animal, I have to look at the whole package, particularly when it comes to a bull. I have to look at his dam and make sure that she gave enough milk, she had correct conformation, good sound hooves, lots of things, and a good mothering instinct, because a lot of that is passed on in genetics.
And you're allowing these animals to lead a natural life as you're raising them. So those things are so important.
Very much. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No.
Oh, I appreciate your time so much. Thank you for sharing all of your expertise and taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Links to the interview guests, farms, and topics discussed can be found in the episode notes. The Farm Voices podcast is produced by the Regenerative Agriculture Coalition, a working group of climate reality project leaders and chapter members. Please subscribe to this podcast, leave a review, and share the episode with others. It helps us raise the visibility of this important information, and we greatly appreciate your support. Join us in the next episode for more on the 2024 Farm Bill and farms and ranches practicing regenerative and conservation agriculture methods.